lucky enough not to have Michael or Dave at the first session. And I hope you guys are not going to be too hard on me for session number 2. You're going to catch all my errors. Let's see. No, that's not. Sorry. Oh boy. Okay. So this is part 2 of a discussion I started in the GIST Council in November. I'm going to go through a very quick review of the topics I discussed there, which was mostly sort of the foundational issues of what is a category, how do you use one, categories versus classes, and how do you actually, the mechanics of the actual implementation. And I think this presentation, the second part today, will lead into some more interesting open questions for discussion. So this is just the overview of the entire 2 parts. We talked about just categories and when to use them, basics of implementation, some other design and implementation considerations, nuts and bolts in terms of files and namespaces. And we looked at how to define controlled vocabularies and taxonomies in GIST, and that's where we left off. So today we're going to talk about how the GIST approach to categories compares with SCOS and some of these open questions for discussion. So just very briefly, a GIST category is a concept or label used to categorize or classify other instances. They're instances, but they represent concepts in the knowledge domain and so are included in the model. They are used as a way of classifying instances in a lighter weight way than classes and then a series of subclasses. So, for example, while individuals belong to classes, these individuals are categorized or classified by taxonomic categories. So ontologist, mechanical engineer, Python programmer, those are all categories that categorize those individual instances. Categories can be related by a subcategory supercategory relationship, which can be used to create a hierarchical tree of categories. And the big question, when to use categories versus classes, I think our rule of thumb is that you keep things simple by using categories until there's a need for the greater complexity and expressiveness of classes. And there's also issues of governance. So if you have a set of categories or controlled vocabulary that's going to be managed by taxonomists or subject matter experts rather than ontologists, these best go outside the ontology into separate vocabularies. And there's some relevance of the quantity. So if you have, but there's no clear line, but if you have 1,000 concepts, likely you are going to want to put those into categories rather than subclasses. Let's see where this part. So we said that you define a subclass of just category. For example, here we have the subclass skill, which is a subclass of just category. And then you define different instances of this skill class. So for example, we have the owl skill. And we can use just is categorized by to link instances to these categories. So person Claire is categorized by skill owl, and I'll discuss very briefly a little bit about the use of this term is categorized by. And then you can link instances through categories. So for example, if we see that semantic arts and Claire are both categorized in some way by OWL, this indicates that there's some link between these two individuals that might be useful. So we can relate categories to one another, as I mentioned, through the supercategory relationship. So Python programming would be a subcategory of computer programming, and just provides a number of built-in category subclasses. But of course, in your own ontology extensions, you will likely need additional category subclasses. So a few other design considerations. I discussed supercategory and subcategory already. This is an important point. So I pointed out that going back to this slide, it's not really clear what is categorized by means and how semantic arts is categorized by an OWL skill in a different way from the way Claire is categorized by that skill. So what I generally do is define subcategories. So for example, subproperties. So for example, the property has expertise is a subproperty of just is categorized by, but it gives you more semantic content in indicating how exactly, for example, Claire is related to this particular skill. And then another one requires expertise, has a different semantics. And so here we can say semantic arts requires a certain expertise, Claire has a certain expertise, and they meet up that way, instead of this sort of anodyne sense of, well, they're categorized by them. What does that mean? We talked
Rebecca,
about, yeah.
Quick question. Can you go back to that slide? Do you intend that requires expertise is a subproperty of categorized by, or just has expertise?
No, both. Both are.
Oh, both. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, I see that now. Okay.
Yeah. We talked a little about if you've started with categories, because as we recommend, if categories fulfill your current semantic needs, it's probably best to keep things simple with categories, but you may then discover that your semantic requirements have increased and you actually want to convert these to to subclasses. And so I won't go through this whole thing because this is supposed to review. So then what you can do is create a new class and put restrictions on it that it has these categories, it relates to these categories in some way, but you're also defining a class ontologist, which can have other properties. For example, in this case, we're saying an ontologist has read Michael's ontology book. So that would be more useful for, let's say, semantic arts, rather than just looking for somebody who has a skill in OWL. Semantic arts is actually looking for an ontologist who has these and probably many other properties. Okay, and we went through the nuts and bolts, which are very interesting. Some of this is described in our new style guide. how to use namespaces to differentiate categories from instance data from classes and properties, how you can organize your files to distinguish taxonomies and ontologies, and similarly, how you could partition the knowledge graph into different named graphs for these different types of entities. We talked about controlled vocabularies, and just offers two classes, both subclasses of collection. So there is a just controlled vocabulary class, which is a direct subclass of collection, which can be any type of controlled vocabulary, flat or otherwise. And a taxonomy is specifically a hierarchical controlled vocabulary. And I don't know what others think, but I have not really used these in practice. I tend to just use the mechanism of defining subclasses and then asserting that the categories are types of that subclass, which we mentioned earlier, rather than using these. Do people use these?
You know, I may have made this up, but I don't use it. And weirdly, it is kind of parallel to the whole SCOS, schemes and concepts and all that. I don't use it much. I think, Dan, you use this, don't you?
We've had some examples where there's an actual taxonomy that was created by the by the client, and it's a managed thing. There's some organization that produces this taxonomy on a regular basis or updates it, and so we want to actually have an instance of taxonomy that we can then have put version numbers on, and all of the attributes and everything you want to say about the taxonomy as an object. And then and then there's a thing for saying which instances of things are members of that taxonomy, but that's basically the use case that I've had.
Yeah, and are the instances, the individual taxons or whatever they're called, are they also still instances of a subclass of just category?
The instances would be the taxonomies, not the taxons.
But the members within the taxonomy.
Yes, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I don't think so. Particularly, what I'm thinking about is where they had the what was it? The business process. Although it was like business process category, and so you had an instance of taxonomy to denote that entire group of things, and then the individual members of that, I think in that case, were also, they were instances of a category.
Yep.
But it doesn't have to be that way.
Right. Okay.
You'd want them to be a type of some sort rather than just a member of something. So.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. That seems a really use case. I just haven't come across it myself.
I think it's one of those things that for a business that uses taxonomies, then it probably be something that would pop up. I think for the majority of places, it is pretty much an edge case.
Yeah.
Depends on the kind of business, of course.
I think
and also
taxonomies.
Yeah, go ahead. Is that Dahlia?
Yes, there are cases as well that I saw where they are members of the same taxonomy, but then they are subclasses of different categories. So that's why sometimes you do need both declarations.
That's excellent.
The other thing was Dave mentioned this, but more and more we're working with clients that have existing taxonomies in SCOS. And this, if you map it into, if there's a reason to align things and map it into GIST, then that you have the exact match almost, as Dave said. Concept scheme is almost exactly the same as controlled vocabulary.
Right.
Yep.
Okay, does anyone else want to add anything?
How do we differentiate between, I mean, if something is a SCOS concept, does it, is it make sense to map it one-to-one with a GIST category?
So can we just delay that because I've got another section coming up that deals specifically with SCOS. So anything else? Those were good use cases. Dan and Dahlia, I'm going to make a note of those. So here, my drawing skills are pretty weak at this point, but what we have here is just this controlled vocabulary. It's a flat, unstructured one. I didn't draw all the lines here, but every one of these would be a type of dairy product, which is a category subclass. Sorry, we're looking at controlled vocabulary. So dairy product is a particular controlled vocabulary. And I've got the wrong, this is already a type. And then actually this is not correct at all. These should be members of, this slide isn't good. I'm going to need to fix it. So what we would really have, let me try to walk through this. So dairy product is a controlled vocabulary, and these particular instances are members of the controlled vocabulary. And then here we have the same thing with structured taxonomy.
Mm-hmm.
And using just has supercategory. So I've got to fix that one too.
And is your intention in both of these slides, is the intention that all these brown things are also instances of
Yes.
yeah.
I just didn't draw the lines just to make it more readable. And so now I have it right. This is what a GIST taxonomy looks like. So you have dairy products as an instance of taxonomy, and then you have all these things that are members of the taxonomy. And the supercategory, the direct supercategories, and then you can infer from direct supercategory relationships, you can infer a supercategory relationship through the chain of direct relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And as we just said, as we were just discussing, individual terms are still typed as categories of some sort, of one or more sorts, as Dahlia points out. We talk about faceted taxonomies and GIST, which are really just hierarchical taxonomies designed for UI, supporting filters in UIs. So some of these drill down things, dairy products would be a facet, and then you can drill down to the different facets to select for search. I don't think structurally this is any different from an ordinary taxonomy, but it's just a particular use of the taxonomy. Okay, so now we go into the discussion of GIST and SCOS. And as we said, here's the reiteration of a GIST taxonomy. And so using is member of from the category to the taxonomy, and has supercategory relationships and the typing of these categories. So this is almost, I basically just copied this to make the SCOS concept scheme, just renaming things. So instead of a GIST taxonomy, this is a SCOS concept scheme. These are all concepts. And the broader than relationship is the same as just has supercategory. And they have the distinction broader transitive, which is the transitive version. So these are similar. The relationship here, SCOS broader to SCOS broader transitive, is the same as just has direct supercategory and just has supercategory. The only thing that's slightly different is the broader transitive is annotated to indicate that this is not expected to be asserted. It's expected to be inferred from the series of broader relationships. The other thing that SCOS has that just does not have is this predicate top concept of. So it allows you to indicate what the top level of the taxonomy is, whereas with GIST, well, I've shown is member of our top level, but these all actually are members of the taxonomy. Mm-hmm. So we understand what's below the terms, but we don't know if there's anything on top of these terms, whereas SCOS doesn't allow that us to specify that. So that's one feature of SCOS that we don't have. So the similarities, just controlled vocabulary and just taxonomy classes function like SCOS concept schemes, just category functions like SCOS concept, and these predicates for super categories function like SCOS broader. Differences. SCOS is really a model for organizing taxonomies or concepts, whereas JIST provides a model for classifying objects. So they're really two different goals here. So, and in keeping with that, SCOS is categorized by functionality to link categories or concepts to other individuals. SCOS, as I mentioned, explicitly stipulates through annotations that the transitive properties should not be asserted, they should only be inferred. We don't state that explicitly for our direct supercategory and supercategory properties. I don't know what our intention is in that regard, but it's not stated.
I mean, that is the intention, so we probably should state it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Unless, I mean, the only thing is if you don't know whether there's another level in between, then you would want to use, just has supercategory, saying I'm not sure if there's one in between here or not. In that case, you could assert just has supercategory directly. So JIST again provides this alternate model, just using categories rather than controlled vocabularies, which we've seen.
Right.
And though in theory, there's nothing in SCOS that prevents you from doing that as well. So you could subclass SCOS concept and do exactly what you would do in JIST. That's just not the typical way that SCOS is used. Barry mentioned JIST doesn't provide the top concept of functionality, which I actually think is quite useful, and we should probably consider defining something like that in JIST. SCOS is an industry-wide standard which argues perhaps for adopting SCOS over the JIST model. A quibble is that these predicates drive me crazy because you don't actually know if A is SCOS broader B. Does that mean A is broader than B, or B is broader than A? In fact, it means the latter, but there's no way to know. They've just misnamed it, whereas we have clarified that. That's probably not a reason to decide on one system or the other. So
one thing,
yeah,
Rebecca, that's has driven me crazy over the years too. But I recently noticed that there is a pref label for SCOS broader, and it says has broader than it clarifies it.
Yeah, it does. But I don't know why they didn't write that into the.
Probably historical.
Yeah, it's very annoying. Okay, so the open questions are is just category semantically equivalent to SCO's concept? Should it subclass SCO's concept? That is, are there SCO's concepts that are not just categories and vice versa? Or should we just wholesale adopt SCOs and remove our category and control vocabulary models? We've had a bit of this discussion at Semantic Arts, but I'd like to get other people's points of views. Michael, I know you've thought about this a lot.
Yes. Boy, my mind is just going, which direction should we go? I'm leaning partly just for historical reasons and what we're used to. I lean towards keeping just category and our scheme. Even though in time, maybe in a few years' time, we'll realize it's become redundant because everybody's using SCOS. That's a possibility. But for now, I think we should keep it. As far as is just category the same as SCOS concept, I don't think so. I believe that SCOS concept is broader. It essentially includes absolutely anything at all. Whereas just category really is meant to be something that categorizes something. It's it's identifying some kind of bucket. Does this thing go in the bucket or doesn't it? And a SCOS concept isn't really designed for that. It's completely broad. In fact, SCOS, although you correctly said, it's used for taxonomies, I think it has a broader initial reason for existence, which is thesauruses. So thesaurus has the related term and all this kind of stuff. So SCOS fundamentally is about thesaurus representation, but it also is used for taxonomy. So I think we should not equate SCOS concept with this category. One thing that related to this is some people say, oh my gosh, if I start using SCOS, then everything is inferred to be a concept. And that kind of used to bother me a little bit. Oh, is it a SCOS concept or isn't it? But I think it's maybe not really a problem any more than everything gets inferred to be an all thing. So what?
Yeah.
Nobody's really going to run that inference. It's not going to hurt you.
Yeah, I mean, just as an example, almost everybody that uses SCOs has some concepts that are georegions. So
yes,
we wouldn't want to suddenly say, oh yeah, georegions are just categories. I mean, we think they're real things that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Michael, your point, SCO's concept might be equivalent to owl thing. But I don't want to go, is everything a concept? Is every concept a thing? Yeah, maybe. But yeah, who cares?
Well, you care only in the sense that the number of inferred assertions, or whatever, kind of balloon on you.
Yep.
Potentially. So it could be a performance drag if we rely solely on SCOS and do not give people the existing category thing. I kind of agree with Michael. For historical reasons, I prefer to keep it, but let's as the user community experiments with maybe using SCOS in place of it, maybe we can come back and revisit that question. I'm just, there might be hidden pitfalls, such that later we would regret removing it.
Well, I just to follow up on Dave's point, I don't think SCO's concept is equivalent to owl thing, because person, it would be a SCO's concept, but a particular person, I don't think we call a SCO's concept. So SCO's
well, we wouldn't, but Michael didn't.
Yeah, they do.
We have a client that did exactly that. Yeah, I don't think it makes sense personally, but we've had clients that have done that.
Huh. Okay.
You know who I'm talking about, Michael, right?
I forget now, but
but could you say they were using SCOS incorrectly?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not a SCOS expert, so I don't know.
I don't think that would be a selling proposition to say, well, you've got SCOS, but you're using it wrong. Use this instead.
Well,
I think something is actually in use.
One key use of SCOS is as a thesaurus, as I said, and thesauri are originally used to classify documents and things. So what is this book about? This book is about Adolf Hitler. well, what's the topic of the book? Adolf Hitler. Well, is he a person or is he a topic? So you can put people in there. I would say don't say it's incorrect to have people in there, because you can view the person as a topic, and that's what people do.
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
It's kind of like the Wild Wild West. I mean, you can do anything you want in SCOS.
I've
topic.
added a link into the chat, but also it's this whole business, Michael, about SCOS is one of a family of COSs, knowledge organization systems. And it just happens to be useful for us because it's in RDF, but there are other COSs that aren't in RDF, and SCOS Excel begins to start mimicking some of those, and so there's a close mapping between I don't know, is it 2, 3,
SCOS
9?
is actually an owl ontology.
Yeah, SCOS is an ontology. It's a meta thing.
It's not just an RDFS vocabulary, it's an owl ontology.
No, I said because it's in RDF. I didn't say anything about RDFS or owl.
Okay, I'm
So
just pointing out that it uses owl constructs.
it does. It does. Yeah. And the thing about it is that an awful lot of people use it without necessarily digging into it to know how and why they're using it. So I suspect that there's an awful lot of inappropriate use of SCOS, and that we shouldn't necessarily just just because it's popular doesn't necessarily mean that all librarians would look favorably on the ways in which it's been used.
You have to leave.
Well, I mean, that goes off to this question of if people are using if people are defining some particular person as SCOS concept, I think that's a misuse. That's not something about SCOS itself. That's something about the way it's not being used correctly.
Well, if we understand, I mean, I don't know that I agree with that. If we understand, I mean, I see part of this through a topic maps lens, so that in a topic map, it's very clear that Adolf Hitler is a topic. I mean, people talk about him.
Well,
Yes, he's an instance of person, but he's also a topic.
I think topic is a red herring here. It's not. A topic is much more complex. Anything can be a topic, from an abstract SCOS concept to an individual to a historical period to anything. So the modeling of topic is a totally different question. SCOS concepts are not designed to specifically be topics, although they can be used as topics. So I don't think for me, having a topic class is useless. It's a relationship between two things, like a relationship between a book and a person or something along those lines. I don't think that relates directly to the SCOS question. Yeah, I think the fundamental difference, as somebody said, Michael or me, is that SCOS is used to create a knowledge or to organize knowledge, and just categories are used to classify things, which is why SCOS doesn't have anything like just is categorized by. All right, well, we've got some, seems like most people think we don't want to go in this direction. So let's look at something else here.
Well, I think from a practical standpoint, it seems like most of the time we now have kind of a hybrid thing. Some of our clients have some taxonomies and SCOS, and we're bringing them in, and but we're still mostly using just category the way we originally intended to, and it's how do you blend those, I think, is the question.
Yeah.
Even if
it seems undesirable to be using both approaches unless there's some reason why one case differs from another.
I would at least like to investigate incorporating appropriate assertions about the relations between SCOS things and category things. Okay, so there are things in SCOS concept that don't belong in just category. We know how to assert that with a subclass.
Mm-hmm.
We should probably say that SCOS concept scheme, is a superclass of taxonomy, etc. There should be some links so that some inferences can be made. So that we're not helpless when somebody says, "Oh, well, I have all these SCOS, RDF statements that I want to stir in."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, this can be done on a per project basis, but it seems to me that there's at least a good possibility that there's only one sensible way to do it.
Yeah, with subclasses.
Mm-hmm.
So in my experience with my clients, so most of our taxonomies come in with SCOS because they like to use smart logic to maintain these taxonomies, and I've definitely chosen to put them in as just categories instead, mainly because of pain points with SCOS. That maybe I think this is particular to the smart logic flavor of SCOS, where it doesn't actually declare each instance as a member of the concept. You have to traverse up broader, get to the top concepts just to know what kind of concept you're looking at.
Interesting.
And so we do change them to just concepts, and just categories. And I did write a query that is somewhat generic, just needs a bit of tailoring for each one, but it takes a SCOS taxonomy and transforms it into categories that I would be happy to share as well. I think I've shared it with some people.
Dahlia, what worked with the categories that didn't work with SCOS concepts?
So there were a couple of things. The main one, like I mentioned, with SCOS, as it comes directly out of smart logic, each instance is the only thing that it has is the broader link, and then you have to go up the chain to broader until you get to the one that has SCOS has top concept to get to the concepts, to get to the concept scheme, and that's the only way to know what kind of concept you're looking at. It doesn't actually declare, like in your diagram, you had each member being declared as a SCOS concept, but coming up directly from smart logic, it doesn't have that. And even if you try to put those declarations in, it just removes it.
Okay.
Interesting.
And that makes it.
So are they not typed at all in smart logic? In other words, it says it's broader than something, but does it have an RDF type?
Let me see exactly what it says. I think I have one right here. Sorry, I don't remember exactly off the top of my head.
So it applies a certain behavior in SCOS because SCOS is built into it, whereas it doesn't know anything about just categories, so it just takes it as you give it. Is that the idea?
Sorry, what? Sorry, I didn't get that question.
Well, so does it apply this behavior to SCOS because SCOS is built into smart logic and it has,
Yep.
Yeah, whereas with just categories, it's neutral, it doesn't know anything about them, so it doesn't do anything to them.
Yeah, exactly. So you can build with the UI, you can build taxonomies, and that's what they do because they're being maintained by non-technical people.
Yeah.
And then if you just export it, it exports it as SCOS. It's all just built on SCOS. And yeah, as I look at it now, it declares each one as a SCOS concept, and then it has the broader, but you don't know what kind of concept it is.
That's what it does by default, yeah. But
Yeah.
so if that's what we're talking about, is what it does by default, then that is correct.
Yeah. So that would be the
And that's-
equivalent of us declaring instances of just category to only be just category and not their subcategory.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
And yeah, it's frustrating to work with. If you're writing queries, everything becomes very expensive.
Yep.
Yeah. So
Yep.
that's been the main reason for changing everything to categories. Another reason, but that's also, I guess, specific to our client. In our flavor of GIST categories, we also have a GIST level where we declare what level each one is at, and that also can be really useful in queries. Instead of having to infer what level you're looking at. So that's another reason.
Yeah.
Question, Dahlia. Level is at some level, so to speak, is an accident. How many broader links there are, and if you decide to increase the level of granularity, suddenly what was level 2 becomes level 3. So level doesn't always mean anything. How do you address that situation? Or do you
That's a good
rerun?
question. I guess you'd have to know to rerun it if you're editing your taxonomy. So in that query that I mentioned, I have a generic query that takes it out of SCOS and puts it as just categories. So that one calculates the levels. And the only way that we ever change the taxonomy, it's only maintained in SCOS. So it's only maintained in SmartLogic. So anytime you want to bring out any change that's happened, including the new links, it would have to recalculate the levels as well, because that's part of
So
the
the
query.
levels are just a convenience. They don't have any semantic meaning.
But keep in mind that a lot of these taxonomies came from business users who maintain them in spreadsheets, and they actually believe that the levels mean something. I mean, a lot of places they absolutely cook that kind of stuff in. They do that all the time.
Well, this is sort of like, I mean, the SCOS top concept gives you one level. You know,
Right.
It's
Right.
And just the other thing, I find that useful, except that does that actually violate the open world assumption? Because we're saying that there can't be anything in between these two. Yeah. But I don't know if that matters for taxonomy. I mean, it is useful to be able to say that these are at the top level.
Right.
Yeah, I wondered about the usefulness of this top concept thing.
Yeah, I mean, historically, we've had to just query and find the ones that didn't have a.
Yeah, exactly. Why do you
So
want
that's the root? Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess you can automate it if you want it, but it doesn't mean anything.
Where the top concept might equal a facet, because something that taxonomies are highly used for is organization for navigation on websites and for search terms and stuff like that, for focus search. And so top concept becomes very representative of your facet names.
Right.
At that point. And so while in a structural sense, it doesn't make a lot of sense to us, because it, as you say, Rebecca, it blocks us from putting something in between that and the concept scheme or the type. But what it does provide is somebody being able to immediately pick out the one piece of the taxonomy, which is supposed to be representative of what the rest of its children are about in, like I said, a sense of navigation or knowledge classification. So
it's actually interesting, Mark, what you say about each top concept could be a facet. And Rebecca rightly pointed out that typically people don't subclass SCOS concept like we subclass this category. But if they did, and I've actually seen some of our clients do that, just a few, not very many. But if you did, then those top concepts might often be subclasses of SCOS concept.
Yes, that's true. Although you could have a subclass hierarchy.
You could absolutely.
I mean, it seems, I'm not sure, I'm just kind of weighing it, but it seems to me that top concept says something stronger than querying the top level.
Somebody mute, please.
I'm having a hard time hearing because of somebody's background noise.
Yep.
That's better.
It seems to me that Scott's top concept is making a claim that's not made by just querying for the categories that don't have anything, have a super category. This seems to be saying closing the world in a sense that this is the top concept, and whereas using a query allows for change. I don't know if that's true, but
it's an interesting possibility. Yeah.
Well, the way I look at it is, as opposed to the real world, which we often model in general ontologies, SCOS is modeling a set of terms. I think it's perfectly legal for someone to say, in my set of terms, these are the 10 top concepts.
Yeah.
I don't think it violates any open world because they're modeling a conceptual list of terms. And it doesn't mean there might not be other top concepts, I suppose. Right, later on they go, oh, I want to add an 11th. So to me, that's like the open world of it. But it's a little different than saying in the real world there's nothing at a higher level, because I don't think of SCOS taxonomies as being the real world. I look at them as being
they're not.
They're a controlled vocabulary, so you get to say what you want about it.
Yeah.
I agree with that, Mark.
And Michael has his hand up. Yeah, let's start using hand discipline
Sorry.
now. So we don't.
Yeah, I just want to come back to something I asked Rebecca about early on. Rebecca, can you go back to that slide which had has expertise and requires expertise? Because I've struggled with this myself. So we think of just categories as identifying boxes. What kind of thing is it? Is it a this kind of a thing, or is it a that kind of a thing? And so if you categorize something, person Claire is the kind of a thing that has expertise, skill, all. But it's less obvious to me that organization, semantic arts, what kind of a thing is it? I mean, this requires expertise doesn't seem to me like a subproperty of categorized by as much as has expertise does. But I've struggled with it. I don't know whether it's good or bad, but what do other people think?
Yeah, I mean, I think Rebecca's right in making up another property here. The question is requires expertise a sub-property of categorized by? And you'd have to say, is semantic arts an owl? Or we can say that what type of corporation are we? We're an S corp, or I forgot what we are. Yeah, I guess we're an S corp. But it is it doesn't seem like we're categorizing ourselves as. I suppose if we would categorize ourselves as being consultants, and we would categorize ourselves as being ontologists, I suppose, but maybe not owls.
It partly boils down to, so the classic relationship between anything and a category is to be categorized by that category. So the question becomes, are there legitimate, useful relationships between things and categories, which means something else besides you're in that category?
Okay. Yeah, that's a fair point about this example, but the larger point is that, rather than using these sort of blunt, this sort of semantically empty is categorized by, we can define subproperties to
I agree with you.
And I think it's worth bringing up now that one of our clients is starting to do that more for the motivation. They want it to look better in their graphic UI, because all these things that say categorized by doesn't look as good as a specific link.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we've seen that over the years a number of times.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's a legitimate, you don't want to get carried away with it, because you just start polluting the name, not the namespace, but you just start polluting the term space. That's a trade-off.
Yeah.
I just want to say in general, that it's dangerous to allow your thinking to be too influenced by some existing product, which, wasn't here last year and won't be here next year. XML Schema made that mistake.
Yep. Right on. Yep.
Okay, we have only a few minutes left, so there are more open questions. We only have 3 minutes. Maybe I will try to get through at least one. Actually, the one I find most interesting is this one. And we've talked about this briefly. So many people define ontologies as taxonomies without relationships. And the question is, well, in fact, that was my definition when I came into semantic arts, but I've seen some of our ontologists actually apply relationships. So for example, Berlin, and we're assuming that these are categories here, not data instances, is geographically contained in Germany. And so the question is this legitimate? Can you do that sort of thing between categories?
I mean, my counsel is once you have the urge to do this, it's probably not a category. And this is a classic example. As soon as you have the urge to do that, you say, oh, is Berlin really a category, or is it a place?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Here.
Yeah, unless I guess I have to say it was Boris who sort of introduced me to this way of doing things. And I guess the idea is if this is the only relationship you're going to need between these two things, it's still worth having classes and instances, you know.
Yeah.
I think it's a judgment call. It's sort of an art rather than a science here.
Mark
Well,
has his hand. Mark, and then Mark with a C and Mark with a K.
Okay, so and I don't expect to exhaust in this conversation given the time, but Rebecca, I'd love to chat with you more on this wise, especially in the practices that we employed at Smart Logic, where we had to every time consider exactly this. But I can tell you that this kind of construct was more the exception than the rule. And when we're talking about hierarchical style relationships, but it's a topic I'd love to cover with you in more depth.
Sure. And
Mark, okay, what's Mark with a K? You get the last word.
Oh yeah. And just really quickly. So I do believe that there should they have relationships other. I think there might be a few, but I think because if we realize that these, category schemes, they're just categories, they're just terms, they're not much else. I don't think there's a ton of them. So for example, one thing I use broader and narrower almost exclusively, but we have something in GIST. I think it's like subcategory of. I think there is a strong enough semantic distinction, because sometimes broader just means like I'll have tent and then I'll have camping. And camping is a broader concept than tent, but a tent is not a camping. So to me, there are some, especially that one, is like a true subcategory of that I think might be valid.
well,
That's a good point.
right. Was this first point. I'll just take a minute to discuss this. So Scott's broader relates the concept to a concept more general in meaning. Just has supercategory is a little more specific. So everything categorized by the subcategory can be inferred to be categorized with a supercategory, meaning, whole milk is a type of milk. Anything that's milk, whole milk is also milk, but anything that's Berlin is not Germany. It's only contained in, but that's not a real broader, narrower discussion relationship. But it's interesting that I've been working with some professional taxonomists at one of my clients, and they actually do use that usage. They build a geotaxonomy, and Berlin is a narrower term than Germany. And I sort of pointed it out to them, and the answer was that's common practice.
Exactly. When you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and geography looks like. So John's got his hand up.
Yeah, I was going to say I've always adhered to that. An ontology is a taxonomy with relationships, but now I think I want to change it. A taxonomy is an ontology with all differences between relationships stuffed under a single rug.
Yep.
Okay, I've got a hard stop. So
people do. Thanks. That was very good.
Thanks very much.
Everybody,
For putting that together.
Great. Take care.
Bye-bye.